James Wellington had been standing guard outside Buckingham Palace for 12 years. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, he would put on his red tunic, adjust his bearskin hat, and take his position by the palace gates. Tourists would snap photos, children would wave, and he would remain perfectly still, just as he had been trained. But James had a secret that nobody at the palace knew about. In his small apartment in South London, he spent hours sketching fashion designs and following the latest trends from Paris, Milan, and New York. His walls were covered with magazine clippings of red carpet events, and he knew more about haute couture than most fashion editors. The Met Gala had always been his favorite event to watch online. Every first Monday in May, James would request the night off and spend hours analyzing each celebrity's outfit, the craftsmanship, the artistic choices, and the cultural statements being made. He dreamed of one day attending such an event. Though he knew it was impossible for someone like him, everything changed on a rainy Tuesday morning in April 2025. James was scrolling through social media during his lunch break when he saw an unusual post from the official Met Gala account. They were announcing a new initiative called Guardians of Culture, a program designed to celebrate people who protect and preserve cultural heritage around the world. The post explained that they were looking for individuals who embodied the spirit of guardianship in their daily lives. Palace guards, museum security, librarians, and other cultural protectors were invited to submit applications explaining why they deserved to attend. The winner would receive a full scholarship to the Met Gala, including travel, accommodation, and even a custom outfit designed by a renowned fashion house. James's heart raced as he read the requirements. Applicants needed to write a 500-word essay about their role in protecting culture and submit a creative project showing their passion for the arts. The deadline was just 2 weeks away. That evening, James sat at his small kitchen table and began writing. He described his daily routine of protecting one of the world's most important historical sites, but also revealed his hidden passion for fashion and design. He wrote about how standing guard had taught him to observe details that others missed, the way fabric moved in different lighting, how colors changed throughout the day, and how fashion could tell stories just like the historical artifacts he protected. For his creative project, James decided to design what he called the Guardian Collection, a series of fashion sketches that merged traditional British royal uniforms with contemporary high fashion. He worked late into the night for weeks, creating detailed drawings that showed how the structured elegance of military dress could inspire modern couture. His centerpiece design was a stunning evening gown inspired by his own red tunic. The dress featured the same bold scarlet color but transformed into flowing silk with intricate beadwork that mimicked the golden buttons and braiding of his uniform. The silhouette was both regal and revolutionary, honoring tradition while pushing boundaries. James almost didn't submit his application. Standing in the post office with the envelope in his hands, he felt foolish. What were the chances that a palace guard from South London could win a competition against applicants from around the world? But something inside him whispered that he had to try. 3 weeks passed without any response. James continued his daily routine, standing guard and watching tourists, but now he found himself daydreaming about walking up the famous Met Gala steps. He imagined the cameras flashing, the interviews, and most importantly, seeing the incredible fashion creations up close. Then, on a sunny Friday morning, his phone rang while he was on duty. The caller introduced herself as Sarah Chen, the Met Gala's cultural outreach coordinator. James could barely contain his excitement as she explained that his application had not only been accepted, but that he had won the grand prize. The fashion. House Valentino had volunteered to create his outfit, and they wanted to incorporate his original designs into the piece. James would fly to New York the week before the gala for fittings and interviews. But there was one special request from the organizers that made James's jaw drop. They wanted him to wear a modified version of his Royal Guard uniform to the event. The theme for 2025 was Guardians of Tomorrow, and the organizers felt that James arriving in his ceremonial dress would make a powerful statement about honoring the past while embracing the future. James could hardly believe what was happening. In just a few weeks, he would be walking the red carpet at the most exclusive fashion event in the world, wearing the same uniform he wore to work every day. The irony was not lost on him. The clothes he thought would keep him invisible were about to make him the center of attention. The news had to remain secret until the official announcement, which meant James had to continue his daily routine without telling anyone about his incredible opportunity. Standing guard became even more surreal as he imagined himself just weeks away from standing on the Met Gala red carpet. His supervisors at the palace had no idea that their quiet, dependable guard was about to become an international sensation. James requested a week of vacation time for personal travel, never mentioning that his destination was the most glamorous event in the fashion world. As the departure date approached, James found himself looking at his reflection in his apartment mirror wearing his full-dress uniform. Soon, this same outfit would be photographed by the world's most famous fashion photographers and analyzed by style experts on every major television network. The boy from South London, who had spent years sketching in secret, was about to step into a dream he never thought possible. Little did he know that his appearance at the Met Gala would create a media frenzy that would change not only his life, but also spark important conversations about class, tradition, and the intersection of duty and dreams in modern society. The flight to New York felt like a dream James might wake up from at any moment. He had never been on a plane before, let alone in business class. The flight attendants treated him with unusual respect when they learned he was traveling to the Met Gala, and fellow passengers kept glancing at him curiously, wondering who this quiet young man might be. James carried his dress uniform in a special garment bag, carefully protected and pressed to perfection. He had spent his last evening in London polishing every button and ensuring every detail was flawless. His commanding officer had granted the leave request without question, never suspecting that his subordinate was about to become an internet sensation. Landing at JFK Airport, James was met by a representative from the Met Gala organization, a stylish woman named Rebecca who seemed genuinely excited to meet him. She explained the schedule for the week: fittings with Valentino, media training sessions, a private tour of the Metropolitan Museum, and several photo shoots leading up to the main event. The Valentino Atelier in Manhattan was unlike anything James had ever experienced. The space was filled with mannequins wearing stunning creations, bolts of the finest fabrics, and artisans working with incredible precision. Creative director Pierpaolo Piccioli greeted James personally, expressing genuine admiration for the designs he had submitted. "Your vision of merging traditional uniformity with contemporary fashion is brilliant," Piccioli explained as they examined James's sketches. "We want to honor your daily uniform while creating something that speaks to the future of fashion." The modified uniform they had created was breathtaking. While maintaining the essential elements of James's Royal Guard dress, the red tunic, white belt, and ceremonial sword, Valentino had transformed these pieces using the finest materials and modern construction techniques. The red wool was replaced with hand-woven silk that seemed to glow under the lights. The traditional brass buttons were recreated in 24-karat gold, each one individually crafted by master jewelers. The most stunning addition was a cape made from midnight blue velvet, embroidered, with golden thread and patterns that told the story of cultural guardianship throughout history. From ancient Egyptian temple guards to modern museum security, the embroidery depicted the evolution of those who protect humanity's treasures. During the fitting, James stood in front of a three-way mirror, hardly recognizing himself. The uniform fit him perfectly, but it was elevated to the level of high art. He looked like a character from a fairy tale, a guardian prince who had stepped out of a storybook. The media training sessions were more challenging than James had anticipated. Rebecca and her team taught him how to pose for photographers, how to answer questions from reporters, and most importantly, how to handle the overwhelming attention he was about to receive. Remember, Rebecca advised, you're not just representing yourself. You're representing everyone who works behind the scenes to preserve culture and history. This is your moment to show the world that glamour and duty can coexist. James practiced walking up a makeshift red carpet in the hotel ballroom, learning to pause at the right moments and turn for the cameras. It felt absurd at first. He was used to standing perfectly still, not performing for audiences. But gradually, he began to understand the choreography of high-profile events. The private museum tour was perhaps the most meaningful part of his preparation. Walking through the Met's galleries after hours, James saw priceless artifacts and artworks up close. The curator explained how each piece had been carefully preserved and protected, often by people working in anonymity, just like James did at the palace. Every guard, every conservator, every person who ensures these treasures survive for future generations is part of a grand tradition, the curator explained. Tomorrow night, you'll be representing all of us who believe that culture is worth protecting. As word began to leak about James's attendance, social media started buzzing with curiosity. Photos from his Valentino fitting session somehow made their way online, and fashion bloggers began speculating about this mysterious figure who was generating unusual excitement. The British tabloids picked up the story first. Headlines like, "Our guard goes to Gala," and "From Palace to Glamour" began appearing, though most articles got the basic facts wrong. Some claimed James was secretly a member of the royal family, others suggested he was an actor preparing for a role. James's phone started ringing constantly. His neighbors in South London were calling, having recognized him in grainy paparazzi photos. His colleagues at the palace were confused and curious, wondering how their quiet co-worker had suddenly become a subject of media attention. The palace press office was caught off guard by the attention. They had to quickly decide how to handle the situation, whether to discourage James's participation or embrace it as positive publicity. After heated discussions, they chose to support him while maintaining that his attendance was a personal matter unrelated to his official duties. 2. Days before the gala, James participated in his first major interview with a fashion magazine. Sitting in the Valentino showroom, wearing his modified uniform, he spoke about his journey from anonymous guard to Met Gala attendee. "I never thought my work uniform would be considered fashion," he admitted to the interviewer. "But I've learned that clothing can tell powerful stories, whether you're protecting a palace or walking a red carpet." The interviewer was fascinated by James's dual identity: the disciplined guard who stood motionless for hours, and the creative dreamer who sketched fashion designs in his spare time. The resulting article, published online that evening, generated thousands of comments and shares. Fashion influencers began posting videos analyzing James's story and predicting how his appearance might influence future trends. Some praised the Met Gala for highlighting working-class heroes, while others questioned whether the event was becoming too commercial or losing its artistic focus. Meanwhile, James was trying to process the reality of his situation. In less than 48 hours, he would be walking up the most famous steps in the fashion world, photographed by hundreds of cameras, and attending a party with the biggest celebrities on the planet. The boy who had spent years dreaming about fashion, from his small apartment, was about to enter a world he had only seen on screens. But as he looked at his reflection in the hotel mirror, wearing the most beautiful uniform he had ever seen, James realized he was ready for whatever came next. The morning of the Met Gala dawned bright and clear in New York City. James woke up at 5 a.m., his internal clock still programmed to his palace guard schedule, even though he wouldn't need to report for duty today. Instead, he would be preparing for the most important fashion event of his life. The hotel suite that had been arranged for him was larger than his entire London apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Central Park, and laid out carefully on the bed was his completed Valentino uniform, each piece perfectly pressed and ready. James's phone had been buzzing non-stop since midnight. Messages were pouring in from friends, family, and even people he barely knew. His Instagram account, which had previously had just 47 followers, now showed over 50,000 people waiting to see his Met Gala appearance. The attention was overwhelming, but also strangely exciting. At noon, the Valentino team arrived at his suite to begin the preparation process. What James had expected to be a simple matter of getting dressed turned into a 3-hour production involving hairstylists, makeup artists, and wardrobe specialists. The makeup artist, a cheerful woman named Maria, explained that she needed to ensure James's face would look perfect under the intense camera lights. "The red carpet is like being on a movie set," she said, while carefully applying subtle foundation. "Every detail will be magnified 1,000 times." His hair was styled to complement the military precision of his uniform while adding a modern touch. The stylist created a look that was both classic and contemporary, honoring the traditional appearance of a royal guard while acknowledging that this was a fashion event. As the afternoon progressed, James could feel his nerves building. Rebecca arrived to go over the final details of the evening's schedule. He would arrive at the Met at 6:30 p.m., walk the red carpet, participate in brief interviews, and then join the exclusive dinner inside the museum. "Remember," Rebecca reminded him, "you belong here just as much as anyone else. Your story represents something important about how fashion can connect different worlds." At 4 p.m., James began getting dressed. Each piece of the modified uniform was a work of art. The silk tunic felt completely different from his usual wool version. Lighter, more luxurious, but somehow more powerful. The golden buttons caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. When the cape was finally fastened around his shoulders, James looked in the mirror and saw a transformation that went beyond clothing. He looked regal, confident, and ready for anything. The scared palace guard from South London had been replaced by someone who could hold his own among the world's most famous people. The car ride to the Metropolitan Museum was surreal. Traffic was completely blocked around the building, with barriers holding back crowds of spectators and media. Police officers directed specially marked vehicles toward the red carpet entrance, and James could see celebrities' cars lined up ahead of them. As they approached the drop-off point, James caught his first glimpse of the red carpet. It was longer and wider than he had imagined, lined with photographers wielding enormous cameras and reporters holding microphones. The crowd noise was incredible, a mix of shouting photographers, screaming fans, and general excitement. "Ready?" Rebecca asked as their car pulled up to the entrance. James took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders into the perfect posture he had learned during guard training, and nodded. The car door opened, and suddenly James was standing on the red carpet at the Met Gala. Camera flashes began immediately, creating a constant strobe effect that was almost blinding. The noise level was deafening, with dozens of photographers shouting his name and direction commands. "James, over here! Look left! Show us the cape! Smile!" For a moment, James felt frozen. This was completely different from standing guard, where his job was to remain motionless and unnoticed. Here, he was supposed to move, pose, and interact with the cameras. Then his training kicked in. Years of maintaining composure under pressure, of staying focused despite distractions, helped him find his center. He began walking up the carpet slowly and deliberately, pausing at the designated photo spots. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and electric. People began cheering and applauding when they realized what his outfit represented. Social. Media posts started appearing instantly, with hashtags like Royal Guard Met and Guardian of Style trending within minutes. Fashion photographers who had covered hundreds of red carpets were suddenly energized by this unexpected moment. James's uniform was unlike anything they had seen before, formal yet revolutionary, traditional yet completely fresh. At the first interview station, a reporter from Entertainment Tonight thrust a microphone toward him. "James, tell us about your incredible journey from Buckingham Palace to the Met Gala." "It still feels like a dream," James replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I never thought my work uniform would be walking this carpet, but I'm honored to represent everyone who protects culture and history." The interviewer was clearly charmed. "You look absolutely incredible. Tell us about working with Valentino." "They understood that this uniform represents service and dedication," James explained. "They helped me show that fashion can honor tradition while looking toward the future." As he moved up the carpet, James began to relax into the experience. Each interview became easier. Each photo opportunity felt more natural. He was discovering that his years of discipline and composure had actually prepared him for this moment better than he could have imagined. Other celebrities and fashion figures began noticing him as well. Several stopped their own photo sessions to watch him work the carpet, clearly intrigued by this unexpected presence. Supermodel Gigi Hadid approached him between interview stations. "Your outfit is absolutely stunning," she said genuinely. "You're going to be the talk of the entire event." James felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. Just hours earlier, he had been nervous about fitting in at this exclusive event. Now he was being complimented by one of the world's most famous models, and his confidence was growing with each step up the famous stairs. The final photo opportunity was at the top of the Met steps, with the museum's classical columns providing a dramatic backdrop. As James posed for what seemed like hundreds of cameras, he thought about how far he had come from his quiet life in South London. Tomorrow, these photos would appear in magazines and websites around the world. People would see his face and read his story, and maybe some of them would be inspired to pursue their own dreams, no matter how impossible they might seem. But first, he had to get through the rest of the evening. As he walked through the museum's entrance, James realized that the red carpet had been just the beginning. Inside the Metropolitan Museum, James found himself in a world that seemed to exist in a different dimension from reality. The Great Hall had been transformed into an enchanted space filled with elaborate floral arrangements, dramatic lighting, and the most beautifully dressed people he had ever seen in one place. Celebrities who James had only seen on television screens were now walking past him, chatting casually as if this were an ordinary evening. He spotted actors, musicians, fashion designers, and business moguls, all dressed in stunning outfits that probably cost more than he earned in several years. What struck James most was how different everyone looked compared to their media images. They seemed more human, more approachable, and genuinely interested in meeting new people. Several celebrities approached him with curiosity and warmth, drawn by his unique story and striking appearance. Actress Emma Stone was one of the first to introduce herself. "I've been reading about your story online," she said with a genuine smile. "What you're doing here is so important, showing that inspiration can come from anywhere." James found himself relaxing into conversations that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. His years of observing people while on guard duty had given him excellent listening skills and an ability to read social situations quickly. Singer Harry Styles, known for his own bold fashion choices, spent several minutes discussing James's modified uniform with genuine fascination. "The way Valentino interpreted your working clothes into high fashion is brilliant," Harry observed. "It shows that every job has its own uniform dignity." The cocktail hour gave James time to explore the museum's exhibition spaces, which had been specially decorated for the event. Seeing priceless artworks illuminated by candlelight while surrounded by fashion's biggest names felt like stepping into a living fairy tale. Museum curators were stationed throughout the galleries, explaining the historical significance of various pieces to interested guests. James found himself drawn into deep conversations about cultural preservation and the role of guardians throughout history. Dr. Sarah Martinez, one of the Met's senior curators, was delighted to meet James. "Your presence here tonight represents something so important," she explained as they stood before a display of ancient ceremonial armor. "Every person who has ever protected cultural treasures, from temple guards in ancient Egypt to modern museum security, is part of the same tradition." As dinner was announced, James discovered he had been seated at a table with other guests who represented different aspects of cultural guardianship. There was a librarian from the Vatican, a park ranger who protected indigenous archaeological sites, and a woman who had devoted her life to preserving traditional textile techniques. The conversation around their table was unlike anything James had ever experienced. These were people who had dedicated their lives to protecting and preserving culture in various forms, and they shared stories that were both inspiring and humbling. Maria Santos, the textile preservationist, was particularly interested in James's journey. "Fashion is often dismissed as superficial," she said, "but what you've shown is that clothing tells stories about identity, tradition, and aspiration. Your uniform represents centuries of British history." During the dinner service, James noticed that his phone was constantly lighting up with notifications. His Instagram followers had grown to over 200,000, and photos of his red carpet appearance were being shared millions of times across social media platforms. Fashion bloggers were posting detailed analyses of his outfit, praising Valentino's interpretation, and discussing the broader implications of his presence at the event. Major news outlets were running stories about the palace guard who conquered fashion, and the coverage was overwhelmingly positive. But what surprised James most was how many messages he was receiving from young people who said his story had inspired them. A teenager from Detroit wrote that seeing James pursue his passion had encouraged her to apply to fashion school. A museum guard from Tokyo shared that he had started sketching in his spare time after reading James's interview. Between dinner courses, several celebrities stopped by his table to chat. Actress Lupita Nyong'o, known for her own bold fashion choices, spent time discussing the intersection of traditional clothing and contemporary style. "What you've done here is show that fashion can be a bridge between different worlds," Lupita told him. "Your uniform represents duty and tradition, but wearing it here also represents possibility and change." The evening's entertainment included performances and speeches celebrating the theme of Guardians of Tomorrow. When Met Gala organizers called James to the stage to say a few words about his experience, he felt his heart racing. Standing before an audience that included some of the most famous people in the world, James spoke from his heart about the importance of pursuing dreams while honoring the work that pays the bills. "6 months ago, I was just another face in the crowd, standing guard and sketching in secret," he said into the microphone. "Tonight, I'm here with all of you, proving that passion and duty don't have to be separate things. Everyone who protects something valuable, whether it's a palace, a museum, a library, or even a dream, is a guardian worthy of celebration." The audience erupted in applause, and James saw several people wiping away tears. Fashion editor Anna Wintour, known for her typically reserved demeanor, was among those clapping enthusiastically. As the formal program ended and the evening moved into a more relaxed party atmosphere, James found himself surrounded by people, wanting to continue conversations, exchange contact information, and learn more about his story. Fashion photographer Stephen Meisel approached him with an unexpected proposition. "I'd like to do a formal portrait session with you," he offered. "Your story and your presence represent something important about authenticity in fashion." Designer Jeremy Scott suggested that James consider collaborating on a collection inspired by working uniforms. "There's something powerful about elevating everyday work clothes to high fashion," Scott explained. "You could help create something really meaningful." By midnight, James realized that this evening had changed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. His social media following had grown to over 500,000. He had received job offers from fashion magazines, and several designers had expressed interest in working with him. More importantly, he had discovered that his two worlds, the disciplined guard and the passionate fashion lover, didn't have to remain separate. He could honor his commitment to duty while also pursuing his creative dreams. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, James took a moment to stand alone in the museum's great hall. Just hours ago, he had walked up those famous steps as a nervous palace guard with a secret passion. Now he was leaving as someone completely different, still a guard, but also an inspiration, a bridge between worlds, and a living example that dreams can come true in the most unexpected ways. The transformation was far from complete, though. Tomorrow, he would have to return to London and figure out how to integrate this experience into his regular life. But tonight, surrounded by art and fashion and people who had welcomed him with open arms, James felt ready for whatever came next. The morning after the Met Gala, James woke up in his New York hotel room to discover that his life had completely changed overnight. His phone showed thousands of missed calls, text messages, and social media notifications. The internet had exploded, with coverage of his appearance, and he was trending on every major platform. Photos of him on the red carpet were being shared millions of times, with captions praising his elegance, his story, and the powerful message his presence had sent. Fashion magazines around the world were running features about the palace guard who conquered the Met Gala, and television shows were requesting interviews. James scrolled through the comments on his Instagram posts, amazed by the response from people around the globe. Messages were pouring in from palace guards in other countries, museum workers, librarians, and people from all walks of life who said his story had inspired them to pursue their own dreams. A teenager from Brazil wrote, "I work as a security guard to pay for art school, and seeing you at the Met Gala showed me that I don't have to choose between survival and dreams." A woman from Japan shared, "I've been sketching fashion designs while working as a museum guard for 5 years. Your story gave me the courage to finally apply to design school." The positive response was overwhelming, but James also faced some criticism. A few British tabloids questioned whether it was appropriate for a serving palace guard to attend such a glamorous event. Some traditionalists argued that he was trivializing his important role by turning it into a fashion statement. James tried not to let the negative comments affect him, but they did sting. He had always been proud of his service as a royal guard, and the last thing he wanted was to dishonor that tradition. His phone rang, and he saw it was his commanding officer at the palace. James's stomach dropped as he answered, expecting to be reprimanded or even dismissed from his position. "Wellington," came the familiar stern voice of Colonel Harrison. "Yes, sir," James replied, standing at attention even though he was alone in his hotel room. "I've been watching the news coverage of your adventure," the colonel continued, his tone unreadable. James held his breath, waiting for the consequences. "Outstanding work, soldier," Colonel Harrison said, and James could hear a smile in his voice. "You've shown the world that our guards are more than just tourist attractions. You've demonstrated dignity, intelligence, and creativity while maintaining the highest standards of conduct. The palace is proud of you." Relief flooded through James as he realized he wasn't in trouble. In fact, the palace administration had decided to embrace his success as positive publicity for the institution. Over the next few days, James's hotel suite became an impromptu headquarters for managing his sudden fame. Rebecca and the Met Gala team helped coordinate interview requests, while his newly hired publicist worked to organize the flood of professional opportunities. Fashion magazines wanted to feature him in editorial shoots. Television producers were developing reality show concepts around his story. Book publishers were offering contracts for his memoir. The offers were coming so fast that James could barely process them all. But the most meaningful opportunity came from an unexpected source. The Victoria and Albert Museum in London reached out with a proposal for a special exhibition called Uniforms of Service, From Function to Fashion. They wanted James to curate a section focusing on how working uniforms had influenced high fashion throughout history. James was thrilled by the idea. It would allow him to combine his practical knowledge of uniforms with his passion for fashion history, while also highlighting the dignity and importance of service workers across different industries. During his extended stay in New York, James also received an invitation to visit the Council of Fashion Designers of America. They wanted to discuss creating a scholarship program for working people who showed creative talent, but lacked the resources to pursue formal fashion education. Your story has highlighted something important that our industry has overlooked, explained CFDA President Stephen Kolb during their meeting. There are probably thousands of talented people working regular jobs who have incredible creative potential, but no way to access our world. James was moved by the idea of helping others who might be in similar situations to his own. He had been extraordinarily lucky to win the Met Gala competition, but he knew there were countless other people sketching designs in their spare time, dreaming of opportunities that seemed impossible. As his week in New York came to an end, James reflected on how much had changed. He was no longer just a palace guard with secret dreams. He was now a public figure with a platform and the responsibility that came with it. The flight back to London gave him time to think about what he wanted to do with his newfound fame and opportunities. He had enough money from appearance fees and endorsement deals to quit his guard job if he wanted to, but something inside him resisted that idea. James realized that his authenticity came from the combination of duty and dreams, not from choosing one over the other. His power as an inspiration came from showing that ordinary people doing important work could also have extraordinary creative lives. When he landed at Heathrow Airport, James was surprised to find a small crowd of reporters waiting for him. British media wanted to get his first interview since returning home, and fans had gathered hoping to catch a glimpse of their new hero. Walking through the airport in his regular clothes, James looked like any other traveler. But he carried himself differently now, with a confidence that came from knowing he had conquered one of his biggest fears and achieved something he had never thought possible. The ride back to his South London apartment was surreal. The same streets he had walked for years looked exactly the same, but everything felt different. His neighbors had left welcome home signs in his building's lobby, and his landlord had called to congratulate him. That evening, sitting in his small apartment surrounded by the fashion sketches that had started his journey, James began planning his next steps. He would return to his guard duties at the palace, but he would also begin working on the museum exhibition and the scholarship program. More importantly, he would use his platform to encourage other people to pursue their passions while honoring their responsibilities. He wanted to show the world that you didn't have to abandon duty to chase dreams. Sometimes the most powerful approach was to find ways to honor both. James looked at his reflection in his apartment window, seeing both the palace guard and the fashion industry newcomer staring back at him. Tomorrow he would put on his regular red uniform and return to his post at Buckingham Palace. But he would never again be just another anonymous guard standing in the crowd. 6 months after the Met Gala, James's life had settled into a new rhythm that perfectly balanced his dual identity as both palace guard and fashion influencer. Every morning, he still reported for duty at Buckingham Palace, standing watch with the same dedication he had always shown. But now tourists would sometimes recognize him and whisper excitedly about the famous guard from the fashion show. The exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum had become one of their most popular displays ever. Uniforms of service, from function to fashion, drew visitors from around the world who came to see how James had transformed the conversation about working clothes and their relationship to high fashion. The centerpiece of the exhibition was James's original Met Gala outfit, displayed alongside historical examples of military dress that had influenced fashion designers throughout the centuries. Interactive stations allowed visitors to sketch their own designs, inspired by various uniforms, and many people left feeling inspired about the creative potential in their own work clothes. James spent his days off conducting tours for school, groups and fashion students, sharing his story and encouraging young people to pursue their passions regardless of their current circumstances. These interactions had become some of the most rewarding parts of his new life. The scholarship program he had helped establish with the Council of Fashion Designers of America had already awarded grants to 15 people from various service industries. A postal worker from Detroit was now studying fashion design at Parsons. A hospital orderly from Phoenix had launched a successful line of medical wear that combined function with style. A parking attendant from Chicago had been accepted to the Fashion Institute of Technology. Each success story felt personal to James. He remembered the isolation of sketching alone in his apartment, believing his dreams were impossible fantasies. Now he was helping others bridge that same gap between aspiration and reality. His social media following had grown to over 2 million people across various platforms, but James was careful to use his influence responsibly. Rather than promoting luxury brands or seeking personal gain, he focused on sharing stories of creativity in unexpected places and highlighting the dignity of all types of work. One of his most popular series was called Uniform Stories, where he featured different service workers and explored the history and significance of their professional dress. He had profiled everyone from airline pilots to park rangers, showing how each uniform told a story about purpose, tradition, and identity. The series had caught the attention of several major fashion houses who began collaborating with James on collections inspired by working uniforms. But he was selective about partnerships, choosing only brands that shared his commitment to celebrating rather than exploiting the dignity of labor. His relationship with Valentino had evolved into an ongoing creative partnership. They released a limited capsule collection based on his original sketches, with proceeds supporting the scholarship fund. The pieces sold out within hours, proving that consumers were hungry for fashion with meaningful stories behind it. The most unexpected development had been a romantic relationship with Dr. Sarah Martinez, the museum curator he had met at the Met Gala. Their shared passion for cultural preservation and education had blossomed into something deeper during their work on the V&A exhibition. Sarah understood both sides of James's life in a way that few people could. She appreciated his dedication to his guard duties while also encouraging his creative pursuits. Together, they had begun planning a documentary series about cultural guardians around the world. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after his Met Gala appearance, James stood at his familiar post outside Buckingham Palace. Tourists gathered as usual to take photos and watch the changing of the guard ceremony, but now some of them recognized him specifically. A young girl with her mother approached during his break. "Are you the guard who went to the fancy fashion party?" she asked with wide eyes. James smiled and knelt down to her level. "I am. Did you know that your school uniform tells a story too? Every piece of clothing we wear says something about who we are and what we do." The girl looked down at her uniform with new interest, and her mother mouthed thank you to James for the way he had engaged with her daughter's curiosity. These moments reminded James why his story had resonated with so many people. In a world that often seemed divided between practical necessity and creative dreams, he had proven that ordinary people could honor both without sacrificing either. That evening, James attended the opening of a new exhibition featuring work by scholarship recipients. Standing in the gallery surrounded by stunning designs created by former service workers, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment that went far beyond his personal success. A young woman approached him, Maria, the postal worker from Detroit, who was now in her second year at Parsons. "I wanted to thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "Not just for the scholarship, but for showing me that I didn't have to choose between supporting my family and following my dreams." Her graduation collection, inspired by the uniforms of various postal services throughout history, was receiving praise from fashion critics and industry professionals. She had already secured an internship with a major design house for the summer. As James looked around the gallery at all the creative work produced by people who had once felt trapped between duty and dreams, he realized that his Met Gala appearance had been just the beginning of something much larger. The boy from South London who had spent years sketching in secret had not only achieved his own dreams, but had also opened doors for countless others. His red uniform had become a symbol of possibility, proving that inspiration could come from anywhere and that every person had the potential for greatness. Standing in his dress uniform at the exhibition opening, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and the people whose lives had been changed by his story, James understood that his greatest achievement wasn't walking the red carpet at the Met Gala. It was showing the world that dreams and duty could coexist, that ordinary jobs could inspire extraordinary art, and that sometimes the most powerful fashion statement was simply having the courage to be authentically yourself. The palace guard, who had once felt invisible, had become a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever sketched in secret, dreamed in silence, or wondered if their current circumstances had to define their future forever. His story continued to unfold with each person he inspired, each barrier he helped break down, and each day he proved that being ordinary and extraordinary were not mutually exclusive. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, James remained in the gallery for a few more minutes studying the artwork around him. Tomorrow he would return to his post at the palace, standing guard with the same dedication as always. But he would do so knowing that his uniform represented not just tradition and duty, but also possibility and hope for anyone brave enough to pursue their dreams while honoring their responsibilities. The transformation was complete, but the impact was just beginning.